Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, sitting down to talk about Concord. This is, wait for it, a first-person shooter exclusively from PlayStation. Can you believe it? This isn't a third-person, over-the-shoulder, open-world game with light RPG elements. It actually puts a gun in your hand in the first-person perspective and says, hey, here's something a little bit different. It's no Resistance, but it's definitely a change-up from the typical PlayStation exclusives that we do get. And so I was a little bit interested in this one. Sure, it's like a hero shooter I've seen a million times before, but I like me a good hero shooter. I see Marvel Rivals is on the horizon. I enjoyed a little bit of Overwatch 2. Like, okay, let's see what PlayStation does to separate itself from the bunch, especially because most of these games have moved into a free-to-play lane. Meanwhile, PlayStation is charging $40. And perhaps the biggest vote of confidence or worry, depending on how you view PlayStation, is that they bought Firewalk Studios, the team behind Concord, for this game. For this game! And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that doesn't put more pressure on the product, but it definitely raises my expectations. Like, oh, you saw something so valuable in this game that you wanted to lock this company down before they released anything, before the game was ever shown off, not even a trailer, and they bought the company. Very much not like PlayStation, but to me, it had the scent of a panic buy. And I think after playing the beta, I think I was right. Now, at the same time, I have to call myself out. When Concord was first revealed with gameplay at the State of Play, I famously went, as some of you put it, easy on it. And I get it, because I would agree with that. I wasn't really being super critical of what I saw on screen there. I was trying to keep an open mind. I don't really walk that back, but after I learned more of the game, I was like, I feel like I've seen this a million times before. Even if I like a good hero shooter, this really isn't standing apart from the rest. And as I learned more and more, I was starting to cool off on it a little bit. So now, laying my hands on it, I gotta say, for $40, what they're planning to charge here, this game has a little bit of DOA energy on it, unfortunately. And I am going to break down why after my couple of hours spent with the beta. I'm gonna first off say, it's not awful. It's definitely a all right time, but I think it fails to separate itself in some ways. Also, design-wise, it's really confusing, especially on a narrative level. I'll get into that first and foremost. And last but not least, certainly the worst for me, is this game feels pretty bad to play. Extremely sluggish, especially in movement. Perhaps that's something they can tweak from the beta until release, and I hope they do, because I think it would make a lot of a difference in the terms of game feel. All right. Let's start breaking this thing down. So the game opens up with CG cutscenes. These are promised weekly from Firewalk. Basically, everyone becomes free gunners, and as they're talking, more data entries are going to unlock in the Galactic Guide, aka your lore codex. You're going to see that on the bottom left-hand part of the screen. After they're accepted into the free gunners, Dark Cutter calls in and threatens them, saying it's on. Then it cuts to another cutscene after establishing it's week 1, and they're looking at this map saying that they're going to establish a route to glance. Once they go to establish said route, the cutscene ends, and then you're thrown at the main menu. I am not going to lie. I rewatched this set of cutscenes through my recorded gameplay 3 times. I don't get it. I don't care if I look like an idiot. Like, I don't get how it sets up being a hero shooter. I don't get the story they're setting up. This sort of piecemeal approach is not going to work. I can already tell right now, like, this weekly sort of split up cutscene, like, this is already what we're getting. Okay, it feels like they're holding stuff back because they need to stack the content. Right away, I'm like, I don't get it. I do not follow this at all. It just seems like, okay, we have this universe, we have these characters, and we want them to do things together. So how this leads into, again, a hero shooter, I'm not really following, but whatever. Is the gameplay good? I will say, as a compliment, the facial motion capture is really good in this game. Not just in the cutscenes, but like even when you're going through the hero select menu, the little lines that they drop and how they look at their abilities and hold their guns, not too bad. In fact, extremely good. I'm going to round out my narrative criticism there because I don't want to go too hard. At the end of the day, this is a beta, first of all. And second of all, I've seen like 3 to 5 minutes of cutscenes. Like, that's really not enough to go in either direction. But first impressions weren't strong, to say the least. However, I could see a world where this kind of takes the industry by storm. I think of what happened with Overwatch. I was obsessed with Overwatch 1 when it came around. But my biggest problem with the game had nothing to do with actually the game itself. It was just that all of the storytelling was done with shorts outside on YouTube or comic strips on the Overwatch website, which I just had no interest in indulging in. But to have a game that's more live service focused with an evolving story, I know it's been done a lot, but to make that promise that they're going to do so weekly, I could see this working out well. I think the problem can be for many of us is the characters here in their at least immediate first impressions do not give me any feelings of originality. What I mean by that, and this was really greatly reflected in a conversation I had over on Last Stand Media in the Sacred Symbols Cross-Defining Duke episode we just did, where we talked about the characters in Concord and how they are very much strongly reflective of the entire cast of Guardians of the Galaxy. The spiky alien dude reminds us of Star-Lord. You look at Hamar, and she reminds us a lot of how Gamora's relationship with Star-Lord is. Like, it's very reflective of that. Oh, and they're in space. Oh, it's this kind of cosmic journey, like, except it's just a live service first-person shooter. So it's something to keep in mind there moving forward, that these first impressions weren't bad. They weren't awful. They were just like, oh, these are mirrors of characters I've known for years now. And I can see that being a major turnoff for people, myself included. So there are 16 characters to play as. Each character has a unique firearm of sorts, 2 abilities, a passive, and some sort of movement tech to separate them from one another, each fitting a role of sorts. So you have your tanks, your supports, your DPS, and all the wrinkles in between those, like your mixture of damage and support, kind of like a Zenyatta, if you will, who can really just do some heavy hitting damage, but can also heal your teammates. Like, you'll find those wrinkles between these 3 predominant roles here. Out of the characters that were there, all 16, there were 4 I really jived with that I enjoyed playing as. There was Lark, who's a plant character, so their weapon sort of functions as a grenade launcher, if you will. They can also use plants to put them down and teleport to them, so I could put them in one spot, be in the middle of a gunfight, and teleport away. I was just messing around with this character in a match where we only had 2 people on our team. This is kind of what I meant by DOA energy. Like, we're in the pre-launch beta where I feel like we should be seeing a spike in players. And there was a lot of games I was playing where I was short on teammates. And so the matchmaking isn't quite there, or the player base isn't quite there. What I have learned is that this game does not have joining matches in progress, which is obviously a very big problem. So that is why when you lose teammates in this game, you're kind of stuck. And that's in what I think are non-competitive modes. So it's a little surprising of a choice too. So yeah, I enjoyed Lark. Hamar was my favorite. She has a fire crossbow, really good movement, great damage. She gets like 1 shot, but you got to really make it count. And also she gets a firewall ability, so you can really close foes off or do good damage over time. And then she has a flashbang ability that's absolutely lethal, and you can see in real time how you confuse your enemies with it. She was the one I jived with 100% the most, just from a damage output and more importantly from a movement standpoint. The movement in Concord is my biggest complaint above anything else in its gameplay department. I think the abilities and everything may feel a little samey. You've kind of seen them before, but this movement feels so beyond sluggish. It is extremely disappointing. Like, the best way to describe it, and I mean this by no exaggeration, I'm not trying to gas it up so you hate the game. It feels like cinder blocks are tied to my feet when I'm moving around. Just like the base movement is so slow and there's no momentum, so you can't even get going and jump, and there's no characters that move quickly. The fastest you can really move, in my personal experience, was with Hamar when she's hovering. She just gets around a lot quicker. I think that's why I jived with her the best. Everyone else I was performing all right with, but Hamar was the one I got my hands on, and she really clicked with me. Now, when you lock in these characters, when you're playing these matches, some people can obviously, like Overwatch, get to these characters before you, but when you respawn, the character unlocks, so someone can kind of like sneak in and take the character that you were just on because you died and they switched over in the middle of your death, which is a little bit annoying. There's also Vale, who I kind of like. She's just a sniper, but I really liked on a gameplay level what they figured out with her, which is how the scoping is done. So what they did was pretty much you zoom first and then the black fades in. With a lot of games when you're playing as a sniper, like you zoom in and it fades to black and you lose your target in that split second, especially in like a frantic multiplayer game. I really appreciate with Vale that you zoom in and the reticle moves in first, you get your zoom, and then the outskirts of the screen fade to black. It's a really small thing that maybe people don't care about, but I think it should be commended because it does make the difference in playing as a sniper in a viable way. Then there was this older woman, Duchess. She She has an SMG. She also gets like a vortex that can explode and do a ton of area damage. Like she takes out both her hands and starts creating this almost like vortex portal and pulls enemies into it. And it does a lot of damage. Like you could really nuke a ton of people if they're pulled together. And you can also use this wall to block off like passageways, or maybe a bunch of enemies are coming at you. You can block them off. But one thing you'll have to know is the time to kill in this game is pretty high depending on you play as. So like Hamar, who has pretty good DPS, she'll do about half your health in a single shot, but then she has to reload. So there is a lot of encouragement here to work together. You're not really supposed to lone wolf it. Not really any particular character I played as was good for the lone wolf. And if it becomes a 2-on-1, it's going to be hard to survive. So you're really encouraged to play together. And again, what I mentioned was a sort of Valorant Overwatch hybrid here. So what this taught me is that there is first-person shooting prowess at Firewalk. I mean, they have ex-Bungie developers there, for example, so I don't think that was really in question, but little design choices, like I mentioned with Veil's sniper scope, really stand out to me as a big deal. That like, hey, they're looking at the finer details in first-person shooting. Things like movement speed, within reason, can be tweaked. Things like FOV, there was a scale on PC. You could adjust it that way, but even then, it wasn't a massive leap. On consoles, it's not there at all. So there are some general quality of life oversights I'm seeing here compared to the finer, deeper cuts, where it feels like every hero was tackled by a different designer. What I mentioned with Hamar feels like a perfect fit for this type of game. And what I can say is some of these heroes really encourage you to play differently. Like there's a tank that's designed all around blowing back projectiles. So there are, at least from me and my experiences thus far, classes that I found encouraging me to play a little bit differently. I think it's also very difficult to play this alone. I do think you need to get people involved, and that's where we go back to the $40 price point. I could see a world where PlayStation sits there and goes, hey, we're not getting pre-orders, or hey, we're not seeing as much engagement, or oh, we're losing pre-orders from the beta. And so they decided to go the route of flipping the PS Plus premium switch on, saying kind of like what they did with Destruction All-Stars, like, hey, we're going to put this in PS Plus day one. I could see that really actually benefiting Concord, because then it changes the whole conversation. As I'll talk about a bit later, if this game was not at the $40 price point, you'd hear me singing a different tune of like, hey, it's actually not that bad. But because we're asking for $40 up front, and there are so many good choices, you got to look at it a little bit differently. Now, if this ends up being thrown into the free-to-play bin, then we'll have a totally different conversation when that news comes around. But that was the extent of the heroes I really jive with. Everyone else I really wasn't feeling or just didn't match my play style. There are a couple of playlists in the beta. You start off with Brawl, which is Takedown, basically team deathmatch, just get kills and you get points. And Trophy Hunt, which is Kill Confirmed, a variant of team deathmatch. So you, like in Call of Duty, kill an enemy and pick up their dog tags. In this game, you kill them and pick up the trophy. Then there's Rivalry, which unlocks at level 6. And this is basically your search and destroy mode, your Valorant mode, the no respawns mode. And I can see this one being really good for a lot of people. I think Brawl works really well for me, but I like that the options are here. Now, naturally, these heroes have a lot of customization attached to them, from outfits, accessories, and weapon skins to victory and defeat poses, as well as weapon charms and wearable items. After using these characters in matches, they're going to level up. You're also going to have a separate business card level, so to speak, that you'll be granted XP for with each match. For example, I mentioned hitting level 6 to unlock that part of the playlist with Rivalry. This is the level attached to that. How do you get that level up? Winning matches, completing matches, but also completing things on the job board. So you'll get bonus XP for completing said jobs. These are basically your daily, weekly, and seasonal missions that you can get a feel for. And so overall, that's kind of the gameplay experience. Very much simple, to the point, things you've seen before. And really what it was hinging on, in my opinion, after playing it, is that those story cutscenes would be the separating factor. Like, hey, we're going to deliver this weekly to you. And maybe over time it pans out better. But when the game wasn't necessarily the most fun to play, because only a couple of heroes felt good, and the general base gameplay of the time to kill and the movement being equal parts sluggish and not good enough, then you have these story elements that really got to carry weight. And as I said at the top of this video, it's why I started with it. I'm like, I don't really follow this or find much of a hook in this. Like, you'd think they'd establish a bigger cutscene that really pulls you in, but it just feels very piecemeal. So seeing the Steam player counts, I don't think this is going to do well in the terms of a player base, especially since I was already short on teammates during some of my opening matches. And when I was talking to a friend about his time with the game, I thought he put it best. So I'm going to borrow exactly what he said, which is, It really feels like a shot in the dark from PlayStation at a live service push before they completely pivoted away from that. You'll remember a couple of years ago that they announced that they have 10 or so live service games in development. This was obviously one of them. And they were trying to cash in on that live service money because they wanted to stabilize the big single player games, your God of Wars, your Horizons, and so on, so that they could continue to do those without losing revenue if maybe those games didn't sell that well because you had the live service games picking up the slack. Over time, with like a cancellation of Last of Us Factions, as well as how Concord's going, yeah, they pivoted away pretty quickly. In fact, well before that initiative really got going in the terms of releases. And so what you're left with here is, as I mentioned, what feels like a complete shot in the dark of an era of PlayStation that didn't exist very long. And I don't think this game is going to hang around very long, frankly, because I don't think it's separated itself enough. And more than anything, I think it needs more time. More time to deliver more impactful cutscenes, more time to fine-tune the gameplay. It just doesn't feel quite there on any particular level. The package feels extremely thin for $40. If we were talking a free-to-play game, I do think Concord would be in the conversation a lot more of, hey, this actually might be kind of cool. Is it something you've seen before? Sure, but it definitely didn't scream bad to me. It screamed like it needed more time and more to give. For $40 though, this is going to be a really tough sell, and I could see a lot of people in a very busy time of the year choosing to take their money elsewhere. Certainly that's what I'll be doing after I try to review the game when the full release happens. I'm interested to see what changes between now and that full release, and if this game is granted some sort of delay, because again, I think some of the base gameplay tech, the movement, the time to kill, just isn't there. So those are my thoughts on Concord. A very interesting time with this hero shooter, and I'm curious where you fall on things. Did you enjoy it more than me? Did you find it good? Did you find it bad? What about it did you or did you not like? Let me know down below. And other than that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you next time around. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.